Hi, hello everyone. Going live just before 3 o'clock. See who's around today. Hi Chloe, how are you? Good afternoon everybody, I hope you're well. How's things? It's another gorgeous day out there today. Please excuse me being scruffy. I went for a run and I haven't changed yet, so I'm being really scruffy for you today. We're letting standard slide. Hi everybody. Welcome, welcome. Just to show you as well, someone asked the other day, could they see my pet, my dragon? So here he is. This is Fraggle. Massively unimpressed by the whole thing. He's a bit grumpy today. So there we go. He's going to sit here and heckle me probably. As we go. Hello everyone. Welcome, welcome. How's everyone doing? Nutella sandwiches from Chloe. Skills, Chloe, well done. I have my, for those who are on Mug Patrol, I have my Wonder Woman mug today in honour of Mary Seacole, who we're talking about today, because I love her and she's absolutely phenomenal. So she's a bit of a Wonder Woman, so I thought we'd go big. Fantastic. All right, we'll just give it a little bit more and then we'll start in a second. Hope everyone's been enjoying the lovely weather. I went out for a run today. Oh, it's just beautiful outside. Just the blossom coming out and the blue skies, and you kind of feel like there's hope to be had out there, which is rather nice. All right. Hi, Emma, in from New York. Hello, up early. How are we all doing? Right, so I think we'll get going, shall we? Today, I thought we'd talk, so I decided I'm going to do Women's Wednesdays. Today is Wednesday. And so I thought we'd start with our first women. And I've started with one of the people that I love the most in British history as an unsung female hero, and that is the wonderful Mary Seacole. Now, I did put a little picture up on Instagram earlier, but I want to show you a picture of her. This is the glorious Mary Seacole. She is an absolute legend, and she's kind of been forgotten in history, so that's sort of why I like her so much. I think it's really important to shine a light on the people who have been forgotten a bit, but who were incredibly important and did an awful lot for the country. So she was a nurse in the same time as Florence Nightingale, and they actually worked together. But you may not have heard Mary Seacole's name before. You almost certainly would have heard Florence Nightingale's name. But Mary Seacole is very, very different to Florence Nightingale in that she had an awful lot of doors closed to her that she really had to punch her way through. And I'm not saying Florence Nightingale didn't, because she absolutely did. But Mary Seacole had a few more doors closed in her face, which I'll explain about. So kind of going all the way back to the start, she was born in 1805, and she was born in Jamaica. Her mother was Jamaican. Her father was actually Scottish. So she was mixed race. She had quite a light skin tone, which she always prided quite highly. And she sort of thought that it made her a little bit unusual, a bit more interesting. And she had a real kind of sense of her British nationality. She loved sort of that side of it, the British side of it. She lived in Jamaica until, well, sort of full-time until she was about 16. And her mother owned a hotel in Jamaica. And what her mother did, so her mother was a very astute kind of businesswoman and had an awful lot of, we're talking early 1800s here. This is a period of time when women, and particularly black women, weren't really given any opportunities. And so you had to be somebody really quite special to make it, sort of successfully in your own way. And so she, her mother had this hotel, and she was known as a doctress, which it was a word, a Jamaican word, meaning somebody who sort of practiced kind of Creole or Afro-Caribbean medicine. And that's what she would do, is it was a hotel, but, not quite the same way that we know hotels now. I mean, of course, they did board and lodging, but often she would be sort of ministering to people and treating them and that kind of thing. And that's what Mary grew up with, so she knew the same thing from her mother. And so from the age of about 12, she was also essentially nursing people, looking after them, kind of being very motherly to the guests that were staying there. Her father being Scottish, and he was a Scottish soldier, she got a real sense of wanderlust from him. So she had this kind of full-on need to travel and need to explore. She was such a curious mind, and you'll see that through the story. And what happened is, at the age of 16, she had the opportunity to come to London. She had some relatives here who invited her to come for the season, so she did that. She actually stayed for about 4 years. And when she went back to Jamaica after the 4 years, she had forged herself as a very successful businesswoman. What she'd done is she'd sort of taken, because when she landed in London, she landed at the docks, she saw all the trade that was going on, and she kind of got involved in that as well. So she had a sort of trade head on, and what she was doing was selling produce coming in from Jamaica, from her homeland. She had friends who would send her stuff, and she would sell it. So she's an amazing kind of business head on her. And 4 years later, when she went back to Jamaica, she took that with her, but she had sort of fallen in love with London and with the UK. And she went back to Jamaica and started sort of ministering a little bit, really, to the soldiers that were there, the British soldiers that were there, and got to know them really well and sort of got on really well with them as well. She goes back to Jamaica. She decides to sort of go and help her mum at this hotel. It was called the Blundell Hall Hotel. And she got married to a white man. Now, this was quite unusual, really, and a little bit scandalous for society. Black women generally in sort of Victorian British society were seen as mistresses. They weren't really, sorry, Fraggle's on the move. I'm being upstaged by my hair. They weren't really seen as sort of the marrying kind. They were seen as mistresses. So the fact that there was a white man who'd married a black woman was quite a big deal. But they were a great team. They were fantastic, and they worked together really, really well. They actually set up a local store. She was a bit of a commercial failure, but nonetheless, when that failed, they moved back into Blundell Hall with her mother, and they kind of ran the hotel. And then in 1843, there was a huge tragedy that happened. There was a massive fire in Kingston in Jamaica, and 30 blocks or thereabouts of the... can we have a guest appearance by Fraggle sometime? Yes, you can. I'll give you one now. Here you go. There's Fraggle. My little bearded dragon. So yeah, sorry. To go back to Kingston, the fire just wiped out the centre of Kingston, and including the hotel as well. And then shortly after that, her husband died, and shortly after that, her mother died. So within a year, she's kind of lost everything that she had. But she was the kind of woman who would never say die, and she was never going to be deterred by anything. So she thought, well, fine, I'll just get going again. She built a new hotel, the new Blundell Hall, which went really well. And actually, after a little while, her brother had gone to Panama. She thought, actually, you know what, I'm kind of itching to get away, so off I'm going to go. She went off to Panama to see her brother. She left the hotel in the hands of a trusted cousin, and off she went. And when she'd been in Jamaica, what happened is there'd been a real sort of surge in diseases, and particularly, if Fraggle gets more love than I do, I'm going to quit. That's it, done. He can do the talks from now on. I'm joking. So when she was in Jamaica, there'd been an outbreak of cholera, and she had really kind of figured out how it worked. In fact, she had contracted cholera and had recovered from it herself. I'm just going to show you actually a little picture, different picture for interest's sake, really. This is a lovely portrait that's in the National Portrait Gallery in London. Obviously not open at the minute. It's about to close for a few years for refurb, but I love this picture of her. Older years, just lovely and kind of wise. So, when she was in Jamaica and the cholera outbreak was happening, she used the cures that she'd been doing as a doctoress, as a kind of Creole medicine, but also with Western medicine. And she was really successful. She cured herself. And then when she went to Panama, she arrived at her brother's and got to his house, and he'd just had lunch with a friend, and about 2 hours later, the friend just keeled over and died. And the locals thought that he'd murdered him. And she got there kind of just at the right time, because they were crying murder and had, pitchforks out for her brother. And she said, actually, let me have a look. And she looked at the body of this guy, and she said, no, it's cholera. I know this, I've seen it. And so she started to treat this cholera epidemic that started in Panama as well. And she became known as the lady to go to for remedies. She then decided she was going to set up her own little, well, it was called a hotel, opposite her brother's place, but it didn't really have rooms at all. In fact, it was more of a sort of dinner place with a bit of lodging, a bit later on. But this is what it looked like. You can see Mary there in the middle in her hat. And all of these chaps around are the British soldiers. And what they were doing is they were coming for, some food. She did an amazing kind of spread. She got a barber in, which was something that the British soldiers had been missing, a good barber. So she got a barber in and business was going brilliantly. And they would also come to her for cures for all different ailments. So she got really, really well acquainted with things like typhoid, cholera, dysentery, and a variety of other things that were potentially a little bit more personal, let's say, as well. So she and they really loved her. And then a few years later, about 3 years later, 1853, she goes back to Jamaica. And in Jamaica at this time, there was a huge yellow fever epidemic sweeping through. And people, her reputation came with her. They knew that she was good for curing things. But as well as that, the local medical authorities actually came to Mary to ask for help with nursing and asked for help with curing as well. So she was really, really successful. And she gained all this knowledge, which would later become very well known. She then heard that there was a huge campaign going on in the Crimea. And it was the British, the French, the Allies, and sort of versus Russia, and they were all kind of fighting over what used to be the kind of Ottoman area. And she thought, well, all these soldiers that I've known in Jamaica, they're fighting over there, and I kind of want to help them out. So that's what she did. She, this is a woman without really much means, but she would make it happen. And one thing that she did when she was in Panama, she would minister to everybody, and that was her motto that went through her whole life. She would minister to rich, to poor, to anybody. The rich people who could pay would pay her, and that money she would then use to help the poor people who couldn't afford to pay. So it was beautifully kind of balanced. And she tended to kind of give everything she had. Don't run away, Randall. Sorry. She tended to give everything she had to help the poor and the sick. So it was someone who, she wasn't doing this for profit. So she decides she's going to go over to London and try and offer her services to go to the Crimea. So she does. She hops on a boat. She goes over to London. She's got no money at all. She manages to get there. She goes directly that she gets there. She goes to the War Office and she speaks to the War Secretary. She speaks to the military and she speaks to the War Office and says, I want to go. I want to nurse. I want to help the troops. And they all basically say no. I said, no, it's not a place for a woman. And she starts to think, is there something a bit more sinister going on here? And one of them finally says to her, if you really want to go and help, Florence Nightingale, Fraggle, stop it. Florence Nightingale has got an organisation of nurses going over to the Crimea. Go and chat to her organisation. They'll help you. They'll get you over there. So she did. And rather than filling in a form and sending it away and waiting for them to respond, she thought, no, I'm not going to wait for that. I know where Florence is, I'm going to pop round there. So she went straight to the source. She went right round to Florence Nightingale's house to find that Florence had left 3 days prior for the Crimea. So she went to, there was the organisation that Florence had left behind, the people organising these women to come in and go over to the Crimea. And she had an interview with them, and they were a bit sort of formal and a bit stiff and a bit, Victorian about the whole thing. And they looked her up and down, and she sort of said, this is what I want to do, and blah, blah, this is my experience. And they kind of sort of went, yeah, no, that's not really going to happen, and we're full anyway. And she got the sense that even if they weren't full, or whether they were full or not, they wouldn't have accepted her. And she starts to realise that there's an element of racism here. It's not something she hadn't encountered before. When she was in Jamaica, she'd had a British soldier come up to her and say, you're absolutely perfect. You'd be, he was trying to be a compliment. He said, you'd be absolutely perfect if you bleached your skin to be whiter. And also, leaving Jamaica on a ship once, she was thrown off the ship because the only berth available was in a room with white women, and they didn't want her on board. So, it's not something that she was unaware of, but she had this real sense of being British because her father was Scottish. And to suddenly turn up in London and have everyone basically look her up and down and say, you're a bit too not white for this, was really, really problematic. And there's a great quote that I'm actually going to read you. She said, did these ladies shrink from my aid because my blood flowed beneath a somewhat duskier skin than theirs? So, she's got a variety of different hurdles here. Anyway, so the Florence Nightingale organisation, they say, no, you can't come with us. So she thinks, well, I'm doing it anyway. How am I going to do it? And she had a relative whose surname was Day, and she went to him and said, look, you've got money. I know that you're heading over to the Crimea to do some sort of business. Well, listen, let me come with you. And I don't know how she managed this. It's an incredible woman. And she sees a whole bunch of guys there who are waiting for their hospital transfers, and they are bloodied and they're injured and they're sad. And she gets straight off the boat, she opens some crates, she starts making tea, she starts bandaging people up, and she immediately starts bringing hope and help to these people. So immediately they love her. So what she does is she sets up, and actually I'm going to show you a little map now. This map here, if you look in the middle, there's a white bit that says British Hospital near Spring Hill. Spring Hill was the Allied Forces base, and she set up her, it was actually a hotel, which she called it, British Hotel, just outside the base. And this was somewhere, basically like she'd done in Panama, somewhere that they could go. It was a place to give comfortable respite for sick and convalescent soldiers, as she put it. So they could go and they could eat there, they could stay there. She had a sort of warehouse at the back stocked with luxury goods for the officers. And anyone who was too sick to go, she would go make rounds to them, so if they couldn't get out of bed. And she'd pack a bag of cakes and magazines and games and all sorts of stuff, and she would go, and there's a little lovely picture of her here somewhere. Here we go. This is her doing the rounds, and she's got the Punch magazine there, so she's bringing them kind of hope and help and all that kind of thing. And she basically went with the army. She was under fire so many times. She just didn't say no. Wherever they went, she would be behind them. And it started out as a sort of somewhere that she would be making money, but again, the same principle that she did in Panama. She used the money from whatever business she was doing, whatever kind of thing she was selling, to then help the soldiers who didn't have the money for help. So she would follow the army. Now, on one occasion, if you see here this little map, you can see up at the top there's Sebastopol, and you can see that the ring of the French and British forces around there. June 1855, they go up there and they start to try and take Sebastopol. And she follows them in. Now, by this point, she's got a really great reputation going with the soldiers, and they all call her Mother Seacole, and she calls them her sons, which is lovely. So there's this kind of mother-child relationship going on. And when they go into Sebastopol, she goes in directly after them. She turns up, they sort of said, you know, you've got to stay back, but she goes in there, she gets to the reserve line, and then they know her, and she's also, you know, as we've figured out by now, not going to take no for an answer. And she pushes all the way through, she gets to the field hospital as well, and she starts helping out and ministering to all these soldiers who are injured and wounded and dying. And some of the doctors, amazingly, call her a quack, and they're a little bit, you know, woof. Some of the officers, they look down on her a bit, even though she's taking a lot of work off their hands, because the doctors were so thinly spaced that she was helping all these guys out. A lot of them, though, respected her an awful lot, and the troops in particular, they loved her. They loved Mother Seacole. So what happens is Sebastopol, they don't manage to take it. They're pushed back, and then, if to the right-hand side, you can see there's a big R, which is the Russian arrow coming into Chernaya. And this is another battle where essentially the French take the flag. The Brits aren't really involved in this, but she goes there anyway. They're not British, but she doesn't care. She's going to go in. And at the end of the battle, literally as the Russians are pushed back, they're retreating, she walks onto the battlefield. There are dead soldiers around her. There are dying guys. They are injured everywhere. And she ministers to everybody, whether they are Russian or Allies. She takes them water. She takes them bandages. She does not care who you are, but you are in need, and she is there for it, which is just wonderful. They then come back, and when they so the French win at that battle, and then off the back of that, they then have another go at Sebastopol, and this time they take the city. And she's there with them. She's on the front line. She's getting shot at. On one occasion, she's in a field hospital, and someone shouts, "Mother, down!" And she hits the deck, and a shell lands just next to the hospital. Amazingly doesn't hit it. She gets up, she dusts herself off, and she carries on, and that's it. She's just amazing. And so when they take Sebastopol, she is the first woman to enter Sebastopol. She goes in there with the troops, and she looks after them. Now, that was kind of the end of, or coming towards the end of the war, and it ends in 1856. Now, the trouble is, she's making her money from this sort of store that she's created, the British Hotel, or British Hospital. And, of course, the troops go back, and there's no business for her. Now, some of them come to say goodbye, some of them come to settle their debts, but a lot don't, and they just leave. And so she's basically bankrupted. She goes back to the UK. Seacole and Day is a bankrupt company. And she starts living in Covent Garden, and she's living in complete poverty, and has sort of just been left, really. And then a few months later, she sees in a newspaper an article, and it's about her. And it's all of these Crimean soldiers are coming in and they're talking about how wonderful she was to them, how supportive, how helpful, and all the newspapers basically decide they're going to do something because they've heard that she's living in poverty. They're not okay with it. And they put together a huge, essentially a fundraiser, really, and it's held in Kennington, in South London. There's about 1,000 performers, and there's somewhere in the region of 40,000 people that donate, and the money from that basically sets her up for the rest of her life. A year later as well, I'm going to show you this, have I got it here? Yes, here we go. She publishes her autobiography. It's called The Wonderful Adventures of Mrs. Seacole in Many Lands, and it becomes a bestseller, and it's still in print today, so if you can get hold of a copy, read it. It's a fantastic read. I strongly recommend it. The money that is raised from that, they basically set her up for the rest of her life. But very soon after, she's kind of forgotten. And there was an article in the Times in, I think, the 1870s or something, talking about how, we remember Florence Nightingale, but why don't we remember Mary Seacole? And I think there's a very good answer for that. It's her skin colour, really, a lot of it. Florence Nightingale was the kind of quintessential Victorian lady. She was white, she was refined, and Mary Seacole just essentially lived in, obscurity for the rest of her life. She was buried, when she died in 1881, she was buried in Kensal Rise. There's a Catholic cemetery up there. She's still obviously buried there to this day. Now, for 100 years, she was forgotten, until a load of nurses came over from the Caribbean, went to her grave and actually brought back the spotlight onto Mary Seacole. 2004, and I think this is absolutely wonderful, she was voted the greatest black Briton in history. And I think after the story that I've told, you can hopefully understand why. And in 2016, there was a sculpture that was put up at St Thomas's Hospital, and I love this sculpture so much. It's outside the hospital where she worked. There's the Florence Nightingale Museum there, around the back, but this is out the front, and I love it because she's just striding forth, off to the front line, off to her soldiers, off to whatever she needs to do. And you can just tell from that picture, from a slightly closer up version, her face is just, it's set. She is going nowhere, so she is the one to be. So like I say, if you can kind of get a thing for her autobiography, that would be amazing. Now, the last thing I want to show you... Oh, no, it hasn't downloaded. Oh, never mind. I'm just going to take it back to that picture there, which I just think is a wonderful picture of Mary Seacole. So there you go. That is the story of one of my favourite unsung female icons in history. There you go. If you want to go and visit her, she's at... so Kensal Rise is where she's buried. The statue is at St Thomas's Hospital. And there's a couple of blue plaques around London as well, which I'll let you find out for yourself. But that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've learnt something new about the amazing Mary Seacole. A couple of things today that I just wanted to tell you about. Patrick Stewart, the wonderful actor, is reading a sonnet every night on his Instagram, possibly Facebook as well. So go and have a look at that. That's in my Lockdown Fun tab too. There is also an amazing lady called Lynn, who I put in my stories and Lockdown Fun as well, who every Monday is doing an amazing art talk. So go and have a look at her. It's all for free. Just kind of getting you involved a little bit as well. I think that's it from me today. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for joining me. It's a bit long today. Sorry about that. I'll put the stories up on YouTube and Facebook and again on Instagram a little bit later. And let me just see if there's any questions before I do go. It doesn't seem to be. I don't think so. So, Sarah Brown says she's sprinkling in the sitting room and has a glass of wine in her hand. That's why I love you, Sarah. Someone says, assume she was a holistic natural remedy person in her assistance. Well, yes and no. So, yes, in terms of her Creole and Jamaican medicinal stuff, but she also was, she sort of studied a bit of Western medicine as well. So she kind of put the two together. So it was a little bit of both, really. She was known by the troops as Mother Seacole and the Black Florence Nightingale, which I just think is lovely because, she needs some help as well with the just a lot of love for Fraggle going on here. That's all I can see. Right, I think that's it for questions. So thank you all for joining me, and I will see you again tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Bye!